Good evening. Welcome to Sustainable Landscaping with Kevin Zuidervliet, class of 2013. I'm Susan Kreischer, Associate Director of Alumni Relations. Before I introduce Kevin, I want to welcome several Susquehanna University faculty and staff who are attending tonight's event, including President Jonathan Green and First Lady Lynn Buck, Erin Zuidervliet, Adjunct Faculty in Psychology, and I hope I got your name right, Erin, sorry about that. Leslie Imhoff, Advancement, Melissa Kimura, Vice President for Advancement, Chris Markle, Advancement, and Erica Weaver Stevenson, Institutional Research Analyst. If you have questions for Kevin, please use the Q&A feature to submit them. We will do our best to answer all of the questions at the end of the session. Kevin graduated from Susquehanna University in 2013 with a degree in student development and higher education, a hybrid major that combined education and psychology courses. Knowing that he had 6 months before his first student loan payment was due, he used the time to travel, going first to Australia for 3 months and then to New Zealand for 3 months, where he worked on community farms. This sparked an interest in gardening, so when he returned to the States, he joined AmeriCorps at Bucknell University, where he ran the community garden, which is still thriving today. When his service with AmeriCorps ended, he was accepted into the professional horticultural program at Longwood Gardens, a very competitive 2-year collegiate level program. He worked another 3 years at Longwood Gardens as a horticulturalist, growing woody shrubs and plants. Then in April, he joined Heuchera Plant Nursery as a nursery assistant. Tonight, during his talk on sustainable landscapes, Kevin will talk about basic landscape management practices, review pertinent reference materials, and suggest plants that should be in your backyard now to help you become good stewards of your landscapes. Welcome, Kevin.
I'm imagining everybody clapping right now. Thank you all so much. First of all, just thank you for letting me do this. Very plant passionate person, and even more plant passionate when I get to talk about how we can use them to do good with the world. So I'm going to share my screen for you all. Jump into this presentation, and then I'm going to back up so you can actually see a little bit of body language. It feels like I'm actually talking to you. So provide some context for the talk first. Everything I'm talking about tonight is about the Mid-Atlantic region, the Northeast Mid-Atlantic region of the United States. Everything is conceptual. I'm a horticulturalist first. I work where art and science and plants meet at that, whatever that intersection is, that's horticulture, that's where I work. So I'm not an ecologist, I'm not an environmental science person. So you're getting broad concepts about how we can use ornamental plants to affect positive change in our built ecological landscapes. And all that referring to the Mid-Atlantic, the concepts should apply everywhere, but the plants in particular I talk about are really about the Mid-Atlantic. So if you hear me say native, it means native to the Mid-Atlantic region. So let's jump right into one of those Mid-Atlantic regions. This is the Finger Lakes area of New York State. I was out for a hike and snagged this picture because it's a beautiful woodland, except the understory is basically choked out by Vinca minor, which is the small glossy leafed perennial in the majority of the screen at the bottom. Otherwise known as periwinkle, this is in a lot of landscapes. It certainly was in my mother and grandmother's landscapes, and I've spec'd it out at jobs as a contractor as part of the small business that I run as a landscape design installation firm. And I had no idea, even though I've been in this industry 5-6 years now, that this was so invasive, at least in this region. So hopefully after tonight's talk, you're able to recognize some of the dangers of planting alien species, and you're going to have some level of passion for planting some native plants that are going to be spreading in the understories of our ecosystems rather than Vinca minor or periwinkle. So this is the entire talk. Remove alien plants, plant native ones instead. I could basically end it here, and if all you guys did and all you took away from it was this 2 phrases, you'd be good to go. The problem is that the world is a lot more complicated than just this. What is an alien plant and what is a native one? That is becoming increasingly more complicated as time progresses. So I'm going to start this talk very simple. Remove alien plants, plant native ones instead. I'm going to muddy the waters and then hopefully at the end clear them up a little bit that you can actually take some actions in your landscapes. First, to muddy the waters. Remove alien plants, plant native ones instead. This is Daucus carota. Daucus carota is a time-wise distant but biologically close relative to our native carrot, Daucus carota carrot. So Daucus carota was brought over here probably in the 1500s by colonizers and quickly established itself and proliferated up and down the East Coast. It is not what I would consider a bully plant. It doesn't necessarily stop native plants from doing what they are trying to achieve and do, but it certainly is everywhere and is beautiful. If you look this plant up online today, you'll probably find sites saying that it is native. It's not truly native. It was brought here by humans. But at this point, it's become what most people refer to as naturalized, meaning our native wildlife have found healthy uses for it. This is a swallowtail caterpillar. You've probably seen these as adult swallowtail butterflies or in the larval stage here, eating your parsley or your dill in your garden. You may have killed them. Shame on you. Just go buy some parsley and dill from the store and leave those suckers alone. In fact, plant more parsley and dill and Queen Anne's lace for them to eat because they're part of our native ecosystem. They're looking for food. So we're trying to provide these types of insects food. And if we remove this non-native plant, we're removing a food source. So is that an alien invasive plant that needs to be eradicated from our landscapes? I would argue at this point, no, that has naturalized to such a point that it's beneficial to our native plants, native insects, and native animals. So it should remain. So this, let me be clear, is not anybody's definition of a native plant, including my definition of a native plant. This is my definition of what type of native plant you should plant in your garden. In your region, the plants that grow best help the most native wildlife. In your region, the plant that grows best and helps the most native wildlife. Okay, so what does that mean? There is a great example of a plant, Daucus carota, Queen Anne's lace, that in our region grows very well and helps a lot of native wildlife. Great plant in your garden, not originally from the Northeast. Tsuga canadensis, eastern hemlock, is native to our area, is in fact the Pennsylvania state tree. But at this point, the climate is too warm for that plant to be successful. And there are two alien invasive insects. This would be the part if we were live, I'd be like, anybody know them? Shout them out. Because I'm sure there's plant passionate people that know this insect. But since we're here, I'm just gonna have to answer it for you. Woolly adelgid is one and elongate hemlock scale is the other that have effectively decimated this plant to the point of extinction in most of its natural range. So that plant no longer grows well here. Does it help native wildlife? Yes. What are you going to have to do to keep it alive? Treat it with dangerous chemicals constantly until you're gone and the next homeowner picks up the baton. So not a great native plant for us to be planting in our landscapes any longer. All right, here's a lot of information. This is from Proven Winners Plant Catalog. Proven Winners is one of the best breeders that markets to consumers in the green industry. There's a lot of great marketers, but they primarily market to commercial growers. They are marketing to you and I and everybody that goes to a garden center or Home Depot. You'll see their Proven Winner pots. You'll see all their plant names. You'll think, oh, it's a Proven Winner. I should buy it and put my garden. That's what I did at first. Proven Winner is just a brand name. But what they want you to see is, first of all, their logo, and then they want you to see Gatsby Moon. So these are the two areas that they want you to see Gatsby Moon, and I want you to pay attention to those hieroglyphics in the bottom. So there's a lot of information here. They have the full description, densely packed, double flowers with stronger stems, and blah, 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 blah. Gatsby Moon is the name they will put on the side of their pots that's really big and bold. So this plant caught your eye. You go to the garden center and you say, hey, nursery person, I want a Gatsby moon. And they bring you the Gatsby moon, and you don't even know that it's a Hydrangea quercifolia, which is the italicized information, H. quercifolia. H. quercifolia, Hydrangea quercifolia, Gatsby moon, is a cultivated variety. It's cultivated by humans to be a selection for your landscape. Now, that little hieroglyphic of the N at the bottom is supposed to mean native. But native to where? This magazine went out all over the country. It's native to Georgia, South Carolina, the mountainous regions in the lower Appalachian. It's totally not even close to native to the mid-Atlantic region. So if you picked up on any of my derision, Proven Winners is trying to get you to buy a native plant. And I really did, before I started this talk, think that Hydrangea quercifolia was a native plant. It's not native to the mid-Atlantic at all. Now, are insects going to find ways to pollinate this plant and use it as a benefit? Absolutely. Are there better choices that are native to our area? Yes. And to further make this complicated, this is something people would call a native var. You'll hear that name in the green industry. You'll even see it in signs and garden centers, nativars. What is a native-var? You would think it's a native variety. It is not. A native plant is a straight species plant that you go in the woods, you pick it up, native plant. The next to the straight species plant you picked up that has a separate flower color that's a little bit different, that's a naturally occurring variety. A cultivated variety is a cultivar. So a nativar is a native plant that has been cultivated into a variety. So it's a totally fictitious word, and it's a very dangerous one, because Hydrangea quercifolia, Gatsby moon, is on the right, has really large flowers, big panicles, very beautiful, but all of the flowers that you see there are sterile and have no pollen, no use for any pollinator, native or non-native. On the left-hand side is Hydrangea quercifolia, straight species, a native plant that the fertile flowers are exposed to, those are actually European honeybees, but let's just pretend that they're native pollinators taking advantage of the situation. So nativars can be really dangerous. You want to avoid them when at all possible. We're going to talk about why that's probably impossible, and I'm going to recognize that. But if you can shop for straight species plants, you very much should buy plants that are not a cultivar or a nativar. They are just the straight species, because there's some dangerous side effects to this tampering with the genetics. If you are going to buy a cultivar, buying one that looks visually similar to the native plant would be how I would encourage you to go about that. Let's switch gears. Let's talk about the ecosystem at large, our ecosystem. Many of you will recognize this as, let's say it together, Susquehanna University, Selinsgrove. I picked this out because it's a fairly typical landscape of a lot of the mid-Atlantic region, the eastern seaboard in general. Not every place has a university on it, but there are usually some large employer that has some sort of campus style infrastructure in place. And that's important to note, because a lot of this is what I would consider a desert to our native insects and animals. Grass lawns are utilized by Canada geese and deer and some other species, but by and large, our native insects can't use it that much. And why am I harping so much on native insects? I'm mostly using Doug Talmy, I'm assuming Dr. Doug Talmy, out of University of Delaware's book, Bringing Nature Home. He's an entomologist there, important distinguishment, entomologist there, and his book basically argues that if we provide food at the lowest trophic level, that trophic level will feed the next level to the next level, the next level, and that will help begin heal our overall environment. So talking about food and thinking about habitat spaces for our natural insects and animals is kind of what this whole talk amounts to. And there are large desertous zones highlighted in red here that our native insects, animals can't take use of. They're lawns, they're agricultural areas, they are parking lots, they're buildings, roadways. I didn't even get all of them because it would have been so tedious. I would have been here all day. But the point is that a lot of our built landscape, built ecosystem has become desert areas. And we kind of have these islands that our insects and animals are hopping from, little front garden here to the little back garden here to the tree that's over there. And if we plant alien species that don't have any food value, now they don't even have anywhere to go. They go, oh, there's food over there. They get those, no food. So the focus on this is look at how many backyards there are. Look at how much good the individual has an opportunity to do. And now we need to think about how we're going to answer that question. Let's take Pine Lawn, for example, home of our current president, Jonathan Green. This is admittedly an old picture. It's from Google Street View, but I know there's been landscaping done recently. The reason I chose this picture is because it's very close to what a lot of front lawns in America look like because of the elements in it. So we're going to get into that. We need to back up just a little bit before we charge ahead with what plants we're putting in the garden. We need a little backstory. The ideal backyard, what does that look like? It looks like the picture on the right. That is not a forest. That is a highly cultivated, managed native garden in Heuchera, Delaware called Mount Cuba Center. Mount Cuba Center, I believe, is an old DuPont estate that has millions and millions and millions of dollars in an endowment that is doled out to skilled horticultural staff that then go out and garden and make the place beautiful, but it's all native plants or primarily native plants. So that's what your backyard should look like. Very few people in this metaphorical room would be able to achieve that because you don't have millions of dollars, you don't have the time or energy of multiple horticultural staff to upkeep this. So it's not really realistic, but let's talk about it as if we could do it. It's three-dimensional. Animals, insects, birds, bees, all of them could move upwards, forwards, and backwards in this space versus the little 2 to 4 foot front garden that most of us have. That's not a very large lateral space. And then we usually put maybe a boxwood shrub that's waist height. That's not a lot of upward space for something like an owl or a predator species to really take advantage of, let alone something to nest in. So first and foremost, it's three-dimensional. It's big. It takes use of all of the square footage available to it. It promotes a forest edge ecology. Most of us live in a forest edge ecology. There are some people that probably live in a very old community that trees have become predominant, and you could maybe say, okay, I live in a forested region. Most of us live somewhere where there are trees, shrubs, perennials, lawn, and then a street, sidewalk, humans using space, your house. So if we can create a three-dimensional forest edge ecology, that's going to mimic what our natural environment was once upon a time, with the acceptance that there are certain plant species that are no longer successful here. You'll notice that I have trees, shrubs, perennials, leaves, branches, rocks. All of them provide the same things. They provide housing and food sources in some way, shape, or form to something in the ecosystem. If we're only providing housing and food sources to one part of the ecosystem, we're not really addressing all of it. So if we look at this in a three-dimensional way, we think about our forest edge ecology, what that looks like. What is that? Trees, shrubs, perennials, and then we're leaving detritus for the detritivores, like leaves, branches, yes, rocks, because moss grows on rocks, lichens grow on rocks, things eat those things. All of that is part of our ecosystem. And you'll notice in this picture, rocks are predominant in the picture and are important both as ornamental and hiding space for things like salamanders and centipedes and other creepy crawlies. All right, what's the realistic backyard? This is a picture I took of a garden that a client and I developed, a garden we developed over time, a couple years, to do this little space. We kept adding and subtracting and doing a little of this and that. Most of these are natives. All of them are cultivars or native vars, but they are not so cultivated that natural insects couldn't use them by and large. There's one plant of mine in there, Calycanthus burgundyspice, I'm looking at here. This happens when we have HOAs and peer pressure. Form must meet function. Form always should meet function, but in this case, it must meet function. What is the function? The function is to do the most good in the smallest amount of space possible. So you'll notice there's not much space in between plants. It's pretty packed in there. You'll also notice that it doesn't necessarily look untidy Now, it doesn't look like Versailles, which for some reason, a lot of people are trying to make their front yards look like Versailles. We don't live in pre-revolutionary France. Why are we trying to look like that still? It looks a little wild, but still neat and organized, and your eye has things to flow to and move through. So there is a form and there's a function here because all of it's native. And you'll notice I have many of the same things on the as common elements: shade trees, flowering shrubs, evergreen shrubs, and perennials. This is not a garden big enough for a shade tree. Most properties have enough room for a shade tree. There is a small flowering shrub and a small flowering tree in the background. So now let's talk about plant recommendations by category. Again, Mount Cuba Center, ideal. Probably not unachievable for most of us. But what we can achieve is if we were to go into Pine Lawn and say, how do we do this? How do we implement this strategy? First of all, I was looking at the shade trees here and I was like, wow, that is a great black walnut. Great job, native plant. There are a few problems with it. Not every native plant is created equally. There are large walnuts. If you've ever experienced these, they're about baseball-sized, 2 to 3 pound walnuts that fall 50 to 100 feet out of the tree, splat on the ground underneath it. They cause these death areas because they're allelopathy, a challenging word to say. Basically, it means this plant exudes a natural herbicide that kills off most plants in certain plant families. So you see the lawn is fine, but if you were to plant something from the tomato family underneath it, it would just wilt and die because there's basically an herbicide in the ground from it. So if we were to replace this tree, my suggestion would be a red maple, which some of this information comes from that book, Bringing Nature Home. He did multiple studies over years to look at what types of insects eat these trees. And then he made lists of recommendations that say, 500 Lepidoptera species live on white oak trees. Lepidoptera is our caterpillar species, which feeds birds, and then the birds feed other things. And so we get back to the trophic levels. Acer rubrum is one of the ones that is, can I say the word herbivorized? I don't know if that's a word. Eaten. The leaves are eaten by the most insects without causing the plant death or harm. So it feeds a lot of things. So that's why I'm recommending these plants, and especially red maple. On this page, you're going to notice on all the plant recommendation pages, I have red maple as a common name in the top left. Then underneath that, the botanic name, scientific name, Latin name, whatever you want to call it, because everybody, any garden center you go to will know Acer rubrum. Some people might call red maple something else because it's a common name. The names in quotes, October Glory and Frank's Red, are cultivars, or somebody may call them nativars. The cultivars I'm only recommending them because most of the time you are not going to be able to find straight species in a garden center or a nursery. Why is that? It's tied to money. These plants are patented, so people are getting royalties. They're getting money off the trademarks. So they are being marketed and there's money being put into them for people to purchase them. So when you go somewhere to purchase a plant, you're going to find a cultivar. Which cultivar should you buy? When we talked about Hydrangea quercifolia, we talked about plants that look as similar to the original plant as possible. October Glory and Frank's Red basically have the volume turned up a little bit on the red factor. So on the left-hand side, I'm sure the saturation was turned up because that seems a little excessive even for a red maple. They're a darker red than the native plant. They have a little bit better landscape value because they are a deeper shade of orange and red. All right. So small flowering tree. I love identifying plants. It's all I talk about. I ask some of my friends who are here joining us tonight. It's pretty much all I do. We go on a walk or a hike. You almost can't talk to me because I'm constantly just identifying trees. I can't for the life of me figure out what that plant is. I think it's a crabapple. If it is a crabapple, there are native species and there's non-native species and there's hybrids between the two. So in all likelihood, it's not native. We're just going to pretend like it isn't. I'm going to recommend one of my favorite native plants to replace this, a serviceberry or shadbush. So named because shad, which is I'm told is a native fish, run at the time of year that it is doing that spectacular blooming on the left-hand side with the white flowers. Serviceberry because it's the time of year that you can dig graves again. Got a little dark on you there. Sorry, bringing it back to horticulture. Amelanchier X grandiflora is a cross, but is a cross between our two native plants. So there's so much weird specialty knowledge that's encapsulated in doing a good job with your landscape. And that's part of this talk, is to like totally overwhelm you and confuse you. Another part of this talk is to kind of give you some tools about how to talk about these plants to industry professionals, because we get wrapped up in our own language using words like cultivar and nativar that you may not understand or know, but after tonight you could say, hey, I'm concerned about this being of good interest to all of my plants. Is this nativar not going to be recognized, or is this actually native to the mid-Atlantic? So Amelanchier, Autumn Brilliance, the cultivar of serviceberry, just has really good fall color. Again, doesn't really change much for our native insects, other than some brighter target from the sky to find the plant. A signature tree. I had a really hard time categorizing this, but I wanted to address it. Japanese maples, everybody loves them. They're super cool. They're beautiful, awesome architectural tree form in the winter. The summer has that dissect leaf. It has good fall color. It's got, I would say, almost 4 seasons of interest, probably more like 3. So I felt like it had to be addressed, but signature tree isn't really a category. Kind of made it up just so I could address it. This is the only one that I will say that you need to buy this cultivar to address this plant. Eastern redbud, or Cercis canadensis, Ruby Falls, is a red-leafed eastern redbud that has a weeping habit. The red leaves can be bad, and there's been studies on certain plants like 9-bark that it's a green straight species, but they've developed it to be purple, that the caterpillars that normally eat those leaves don't digest the food or utilize it as efficiently. So this is not a great, excellent, perfect native plant replacement. But if I've dealt with clients who need a signature tree, they need a Japanese maple. I'm like, you've heard of a Japanese maple, but have you ever heard of Ruby Falls? And then all of a sudden, I'm able to sell them a native plant. So if it's a difference between planting something that's vastly non-native and nothing can use it, or a native plant that most things can use, I'm going to at least try and get the Ruby Falls into the landscape diet. All right, climber, I know this isn't there. Susquehanna alums. It's gone. It's been ripped out. Fun fact, it was ripped out by Schaefer Landscapes, I think, or at least they redid the landscape, and I worked for them for like 6 months. So I know who did it. But it needs to be addressed. English ivy is a horrible, horrible plant. It damages the brick, which I suspect is why it was removed. But it also, when it matures, birds eat it and then land in trees and then leave presents at the bottom of those trees, which then grow up and strangle the trees and rip them down and proliferate, and the process expands. I don't understand why people won't just plant Virginia creeper. Maybe because it sounds weird, I guess. I don't know. Just call it by its botanical name. It's simple. Parthenocissus quinquefolia. Easy to say. Parthenocissus quinquefolia has beautiful autumn color, as seen in the picture. Compare it to the English ivy on the bottom right, which is just green, boring, bright orange, blueberries. Best of all, it uses suction cups to climb. So you can see pictures of those in the botanical illustration. So it doesn't destroy your masonry. What more can you want? Why is anybody planting heterohelix English ivy? I do not know. Evergreen shrub, boxwood. Boxwood has a myriad of problems. It used to be a tried and true plant. Plant in your garden, plant, water it a few times, walk away. Now there are several things affecting it. Most foremost is boxwood blight, a fungal disease. Once the plant gets it, it's dead. So boxwoods, we're going to start seeing that become a less and less favorable plant. So why not just rip it out right now and plant yourself inkberry holly? Inkberry holly, or Ilex glabra. The cultivar on this, the most commonly sold one is shamrock. Shamrock, just remember Kevin, the leprechaun, redheaded guy, he gave you the talk. You want to go buy an inkberry holly shamrock. So inkberry holly shamrock, as shown on the left, is the marketing material. It will look like that for a few years, but then after a couple of years on the right-hand side, the plant gets, gardeners will say it shows its knees. So the boxwood will never show its knees. And I always thought of this as a challenging plant to pitch to people until I saw Roger Davis at Longwood Gardens plant these. And then he planted perennials right up against them because he knew those leaves were going to drop, and he could show off his perennials and get extra room to plant in his garden bed. So when you only got 3 or 4 feet 3 or 4 feet to plant, why not plant something that you don't have to mulch right up to it? You can plant your perennials there, and it's less mulch, it's less time to put mulch down. You don't have to worry about mulch. It's just an opportunity for you to plant more plants, which is what we're looking for here, an opportunity to plant more plants. Flowering shrub. I made this slideshow over the past 2 weeks. I showed it to a botanist friend of mine last night, and he yelled at me because smoothleaf hydrangea, yes, it is native, but this is a double flowering variety called Annabelle. And Annabelle is another double flowering one that our native insects can't necessarily get into. It might not be Annabelle. I told him it could be Haas Halo. Haas Halo has fertile flowers, and he said, well, it may be. So I left it in there because I'm right in this situation, of course. So smoothleaf hydrangea is a great flowering plant that can be used in your landscape, but it's another one that nativars screw the whole thing up a little bit. Shade perennial. Liriope is just a no-go plant for me. There's ones that they say they don't spread, that the berries they produce don't really go, but I've seen that plant really dominate dangerous places in our ecosystems. So I prefer Pennsylvania sedge, Carex pennsylvanica. What a beautiful understory plant that is. I love this plant. It's just gorgeous from the moment you put it into the waves after, a summer rainstorm, from when it's upright in spring. It's a beautiful plant. The only problem is most people are putting this in a landscape that's right next to a lawn. So it just looks like more lawn. Okay, I'll admit it's a challenge. So I'll give you a freebie here. Coral bells. This is one I don't think you could argue me that this is not a good plant. Coral bells, Heuchera, Velosa, caramel. There are as many cultivars of this plant as you can imagine. There's citronella, there's caramel, there's burgundy spice, there's purple palace, there's Lovelace, it goes on. Caramel is my favorite one. I love the coloration. I think it's a beautiful pop of color without needing to rely on flowers, and it's evergreen year round. So on the left-hand side, that's about this time of year. It's flowering. Flowers are nondescript, but pollinators love them. Even hummingbirds visit them. We think we need big tropical red flowers for hummingbirds. Not so. This is a hummingbird attractant and year-round color in your landscape. All right, totally switching gears. We're getting away from Kevin's top 10 plants, however many they were, and we're going to move into landscape management rules to follow. There are many ways for me to give this talk tonight, and I thought about just about all of them. I really wanted to give you the fire and brimstone talk that was like screaming at all of you to repent, and you needed to rip out your lawns and plant trees, and you're destroying the ecosystem if you don't, and all of this. My fiance talked me off the ledge and told me not to give that talk. So we're giving you the tame talk, and it's all about what you can add to your landscape, your future landscape, your parents' landscape, whoever you can convince's landscape, not about what you can remove from it, which is another talk. What invasive plants can we remove from it? But I knew there would be questions about landscape management. So I wanted to get into some of those. First and foremost, I guess this is number one. I made it number one, so it is. Reduce your chemical usage. What does that mean? Don't use herbicides. There's so many alternatives to herbicides. If you have a gravel yard, or excuse me, that'd be weird, gravel driveway, and you have a lot of like crabgrass and stuff coming in there, and you don't want to be on your hands and weeding it because that's a pain, get yourself some highly distilled vinegar, highly concentrated vinegar. That, with repeat applications, will kill those weeds. Now, it's not like glyphosate, the brand name of that's Roundup or Ranger Pro, that it's a one-time done situation. But Ranger Pro has a lot of issues correlated, caused by it. So if we can use something that is naturally occurring or naturally developed, like vinegar, some people will mix salt in with it. I get a little leery about putting salt into the landscape and where that goes afterwards, but high acids like vinegar works well. I really like Weed Dragons, which I think is a brand name. You can Google it. Flame Weeders is the other name. It is essentially a small flamethrower, which is pretty badass, that burns plants. So it shoots out a flame, I don't know, 2 inches, 3 inches long. So you have a long wand, you stand here, pull the trigger, and you burn your weeds and they're gone. I've convinced my mother of that one. It makes weeding a lot more fun. Fertilizer should not really be necessary with native plants. If your plant is showing anemia of some sort, let's say, it's probably the wrong plant for that place, first of all. That there's probably a better choice for that space, or you could be utilizing your leaves and sticks that are falling on the property better. That instead of collecting all of them, taking them off your lawn, when you collect them off your lawn, age them for a little bit, put them into your landscape, use them as a mulch, and then let them break down, let detritivores do their work on them, let toads hide under them to eat the other insects, and let that naturally become a fertilizer over time. You can also spend a butt ton of money on leaf mulch. Really, really expensive product. Excellent. Love it. Love using it, but it's very expensive. Insecticide, no systemic broad spectrum chemistries. This means if you spray it on the plant, it stays in the plant, makes the plant become poisonous, it's a no-go. Just one time use, squirt it, it kills the insect, deletes the problem. Fungicides, they're okay. Any chemicals shouldn't really be used too much, but if it's the difference between a freshly planted tree in your landscape dying and surviving that first year, I'd say go ahead and spray with the fungicide. But if you're using that fungicide year after year after year, again, it's probably the wrong plant for that space, which is hard to do with native plants. If you're using native plants, it's much easier. We talked a little bit about creating a living mulch. So leaving your leaves alone, leave them in the landscape, or take them off your lawn and put them into the landscape. Pruning or shearing after fruits, seeds, and nuts are gone. This is really important, especially for your rose growers out there. People who grow roses, as soon as those petals fall off and the rose hip begins to develop, they cut it off. Well, it makes the plant look better, and it does make more blooms occur because the plant is going, oh my goodness, I have not gone to seed yet, which is my point this year. My point this year, which every year is the point, is to produce seed to produce more plant. So that's why more flowers come out, because it's trying to produce seed. And the whole point of producing seed is to create more plants. But that's not the case if you're a mouse, or if you're a songbird traveling north to south. That berry that you cut off, it was the food source for that songbird. The other thing too here is a lot of native plants are edible. Amelanchier or serviceberry or shadbush, that is one of my favorite plants to eat, followed by aronia, which is black chokeberry. Horrible name, tastes horrible, but it is one of the highest antioxidant plants you can get, and it's native, so why not eat it? Allow flowering plants in your lawn. A lot of people have questions about lawn, as you should. Lawns are hard to address. The native plant hippie side of me says get rid of your lawn. The practical side of me says think about what you use your lawn for and keep enough lawn to do that activity. The rest should become trees, shrubs, and perennials. And instead of putting all of your money towards lawn care and spending every weekend on the lawnmower, spend that time weeding or adding new plants or interacting with your backyard in a different way rather than sweating on the back of a John Deere. I'm coming to the end of this talk. This was an hour-long talk, and typically I talk too much. I intentionally made this short because I know you're going to have a lot of questions. Usually when I give these talks, there's not enough time for questions. So I'm leaving you with two pictures. This is at the retirement community I used to help do design work for. Client called me up, they just moved in, and this is what the garden looked like. In this picture, there's a non-native conifer on the right. There is daylilies, which can be very invasive, on the left, and then some sickly looking non-native ferns in the back. And they wanted to do native. They really, really embraced native. They had bird feeders galore outside because they loved birds. They wanted pollinators, they wanted, so I went through the whole design process with them and developed this. This is a very small garden and it's very practical. It has a bird bath fountain feature in the back, bird feeder in the front. Bird feeders, that's a birder question, but my understanding is they're not great. So I was trying to provide as much food through plants as possible. We have native cinnamon ferns on the left. And then this is I don't know if I can like patent this or whatever, but I call this my Dwarf Meadow. It's kind of become a bit of a signature of my designs, that I put this little area in that's effectively a meadow, but it's just a perennial mix of our native cultivars of plants. So they're nativars, they're native plants cultivated to be short. Most of our meadows in this area this time of year are every bit 6 foot, 5 foot tall. That's not going to cut it in this area. The peer pressure, the homeowners associations won't allow you to do it, but they will allow you a meadow that only comes up below your hip. So that's kind of what I started doing in these landscapes, is providing native plants that bloom at a wide variety of times a year and are shorter than your hip. So this kind of ticks a lot of boxes for a natural landscape. Something that you'll notice is the non-native conifer state. It was a big conversation, had a lot to do with budget. Because if we remove that, that's a significant portion of the landscape we're removing and a stark brick wall to be staring at. And it is really nice. So we decided that although it's not native, and maybe there was a native we could have put there, maybe we could have put Virginia creeper, climb up the brick, but that might have gotten untidy. We talked about a lot of options. We decided that that is one non-native species we were going to allow in the garden. We know it's not going to proliferate. It's not going to go out into our naturalized areas. We know it's not poisonous. It's going to provide habitat for songbirds if they choose to nest there. So we felt like we could leave it there. And the nice thing about gardens, and I stress this so often to people, is they're always evolving. Your gardens change incrementally over time. Even if you had Schaefer's Landscapes come in and redo all of Pine Lawn per my recommendations tomorrow, that garden's not done. There's maintenance that needs to be done. There's plants that die. There's plants that do well. There's plants that don't do well. There's opportunities that arise that a plant's lower leaves fall off and you can add perennials to your garden. So never think of a garden as done or not done. Think about how you can improve it gradually, incrementally over time as money, time, and energy allows. So this is a little housekeeping. I'm done. Thank you. I can hear all of you clapping. But I can't because I can't see any of you. It's tragic. I can see Susan clapping. Thank you, Susan. But the housekeeping end of these things, this thing is that I love talking about plants, if you haven't picked up on the passion side of me. I would love to stay here all night and answer questions, and I'm willing to stay as long as you are willing to, or maybe as willing Susan is to work tonight. But if you have additional questions, please, please, please email me. If they don't really fit in terms of like everybody hearing, like, should I plant this plant in my lawn? Maybe you could just send that to me in an email. I'd be happy to address it. In addition to that, I think Susan and I have worked out a good way that I can send you some reference material. So it's just going to be like a little one-page Word doc that is going to kind of encapsulate all the things that I've talked about tonight, but then also it'll have information about some plants that I highly recommend, including the ones that we talked about tonight. So some reference materials, Doug Talmey's book, Bringing Nature Home, which I repeatedly acknowledged, and then other plant species that I recommend. So I think it would be valuable to have that in a paper format that you can have and you can divulge however you see fit. So Susan, if there's any questions, happy to answer them at this point.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Kevin. That's a lot of information. I suspect that a lot of people watching tonight are in the same boat that I am, where I learned a lot about gardening from my mom and my grandma and got a lot of really bad information. It sounds like, you know, rip out that Virginia creeper and get rid of that. I wanted to let you know from President Green and First Lady Lynn Buck that there actually have been a lot of changes. They've planted many native plants since they moved in. And remember, they inherited this space, right? They moved in.
Well, that's what we're all doing. We're all inheriting spaces. So we're making changes over time to do better. And I knew that was an old picture. Believe me, I did know it was an old picture, but it exemplified what we're inheriting, right?
Yeah, sure. I know you were using it as an example and it made sense because it was one that we all could relate to, but the liriope has been removed. So that's definitely good that that is gone.
Good.
And I don't know if you remember from campus, but there is that fountain, Jack Holt's Garden by Steele has become a wonderful collection of wild native species. And SU was the first higher institution to be named a BUSA campus, as we have continued to foster pollinators. So I think we are trying to do some good stuff around campus. So thank you to President Green for sharing that. We did have a question come in. There were some that were pre-submitted, but as I'm seeing this question in front of me from Mark, he's asking, is soil test necessary for cultivating native plants?
Is it necessary? No. It's as simple as getting out there and planting native plants to our region. Is it helpful? Absolutely. Because there are certain native plants that respond well to low soil, low pH environments. Our rhododendrons, azaleas, blueberries, oxydendrum, I got Latin on you, sorry, hollies, all do well in low pH. So if you know that your soil is low pH, you can make a better informed decision about what you're planting. So if you do a soil test, I think you can send soil tests off for free to Penn State University, and they'll give you some basic information. pH is generally the most important piece of information. If you're walking into a garden center and say, hey, my pH is down around 5.5, that's really important because something like that is a valuable piece of information. But most people's landscapes are not significantly one way or another. So it's valuable information, but I wouldn't say it's necessary information to have.
Thank you. Walter had pre-submitted a question that said, how do you create a natural meadow from a large grass lawn? So we're learning that grass lawns are not great. Someone wants to transition that. What is the best way to do that?
Do you want the best way or the realistic way? The best way is to burn it all, and then buy a meadow seed mix from Ernst Seed Company and sow that in the fall, and then do a burn every year on it. Is that realistic for most people? No. To burn your entire backyard is not generally realistic, but naturally occurring burns is what developed meadows in this area. Naturally occurring from lightning strikes, but also from native people, were burning large sections of forest to have small sections of agriculture and allow large game animals to forage. So we do have some areas you could argue are natural meadows, but they were caused by human intervention burns. And to mimic that, the only thing you can really do is mow. And mowing is challenging because you're destroying, it's hard to time a mowing. And so meadows are really hard to manage. If you're really determined to do a meadow, that would be something that I would say is good to talk to somebody who does meadows. And not just do it on your own, because it can be very hard, and it's a very fertile environment for non-native plants to take hold. So it can be done, it's just challenging. I think it's JD Ernst, or maybe just Ernst Seed Company, is a good resource to start at for meadow seed at the very least. And I'm going to include that on that piece of paper that you're all going to get. Ernst Seed Company.
Laura is mentioning, asking about deer. She must have pesky deer in her yard who want to eat her shrub. She uses deer, but is wondering if there's something else that would be helpful in that regard.
Yeah, so part of my nightly routine growing up was me or my mom or grandma going out and spraying the garden with deer off on a nightly basis. We had our own proprietary Zuidervliet family solution I'm not willing to share, unfortunately. It's basically the same for everybody. It's eggs and water and hot pepper and garlic and other nasty things that smell bad. It works okay, but then once it rains, it wears off and the deer come. You go on vacation, the deer come. So the best thing you can do is to plant things that are resistant to deer. The best way to figure that out is to go to Rutgers Deer resistance website. Again, this is a resource I'm going to provide on this piece of paper. They have done scientific studies that rate deer damage over the course of a year and give each plant A, B, C, or D. A plants I would advise in high browse areas. B plants you usually can get away with without deer eating them unless the deer are really, really, really hungry. C plants, if you have deer, they're going to eat them, my experience. So if you really have bad deer pressure and you're sick of spraying your plants, I would suggest trying a different plant that has an A rating from Rutgers Universities. I've been really successful using their recommendations because they lay it out pretty easily. You can sort by trees, you can sort by shrubs, by species name, by a lot of different things. Very intuitive website.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Richard has a path that cuts through an old cranberry bog in the community in New Jersey, and he's wondering what type of vegetation would work best.
Yeah, I think I saw this question beforehand from Richard. And if you're where I think you are, this is a hard question to answer because you're in one of the weird parts of the mid-Atlantic that has a really, really unique ecosystem. I think you're in the Pinelands. If you're in the Pinelands in South Jersey where there are cranberry bogs, that is a really, really unique ecosystem. And so unique that there's certain plants that only grow there. They're the only plants that they don't grow anywhere else in the world. There's carnivorous plants galore and all kinds of things. So for me to try and recommend to you as far as what to plant on the edge of cranberry bog would be largely insufficient. That would be something you'd have to ask a local horticulturalist, a renowned landscaper, or something to that effect, because that's such a unique ecosystem. You're dealing with very sandy soil. I think is very acidic as well. It's just a weird environment to plant in. And I'm sorry that I can't give you a great recommendation. I know blueberries grow really well there. Any blueberries you get are from the Pinelands kind of South Jersey area. So I can, with some confidence, say, go plant a blueberry shrub. But beyond that, I wouldn't be able to give you a good recommendation.
Okay, thank you for that. Aaron, they have a lot of shade in their yard and glass doesn't do well, nor is it really a great option for them. What would you recommend some plants that would do well in shade?
Yeah, shaded environments is what we're trying to create. That's what the forest ecosystem is. It's an upper story and an understory. The easiest way for you to get an idea of what grows well in the shade is go take a hike. It's pretty rude to say, isn't it? Go take a hike. Go see what's growing in the woods around you. That's one way to do it. Find something that's blooming, take a picture of it, show it to your garden center. Another way to do this is for me to just tell you some plants. Shade can be broken down into dry shade and wet shade. Is it really wet? If it's really wet, you're going to want to look up plants that do better in wet, shady environments. Hay-scented fern comes to mind. You're going to be in the fern category, most likely. A dry, shady environment is Christmas fern, which is a year-round. It's green year-round, very beautiful fern. I'm trying to think. Astilbe is a great fern, Astilbe. Heuchera, I mentioned, which is coral bells. That's a good understory plant. Tiarella. What else? Ferns. You're probably safest with ferns. There's others, but most ferns are probably going to be successful. Dry shade is the most challenging to deal with.
My ferns have done very well this year, actually. I have a question from Hope. She has a shady backyard. And there were 2 years when she was unable to do the yard work there. And in that amount of time, her Brunera became a ground cover. She removed thousands just this year. How would you prevent the new plants from emerging? She does use newspaper and cardboard under the mulch, but that's not always possible.
Brunera became a weed. Wow. I would love to see a picture of that. I bet that's pretty cool. I've never heard of Brunnera macrophylla as a weed. That is, trying to think of the common name for that. Yeah, as far as that being a weed, is Brunnera native? That's another question. You've got my interest. I think Brunnera is native. Maybe not. I don't know. How to prevent it? Man, if you're having a hard time with it, sometimes bullies can only be treated with other bullies. I mean, that's probably not what like schools want to hear, but like sometimes you need to plant another plant that can sort of stand up to the Brunnera. So removing the Brunnera, allowing it more space to grow, the plant sort of says, oh, thanks, like more room for my roots to go. But if you remove it and plant it with a really tough plant, pig squeak comes to mind. Can't remember the botanic name for that. But there's some plants out there that are kind of thugs in the garden landscape that would be able to outcompete or play with that plant. Another option is to plant things that pop up, do their thing, and then go away before the Brunnera has a chance to even emerge for the spring. So why not use some Virginia bluebells? They come up March. Do you know what they look like in July? Nothing. There's nothing there. They come up, they bloom, they photosynthesize, they go dormant. Your Brunnera can have a field day. And then find something similar for the fall. Something that pops up, does its thing, goes away. So I guess I've given you two answers. I've given you the bully answer and I've given you the nuanced answer. You choose what you want to do. So spring ephemerals is what you're going to want to look up. Native spring ephemerals are the plants that come up, bloom, photosynthesize, and go dormant before most of our other perennials are even thinking about waking up.
Okay, and I see a comment here from Lynn Buck about Virginia equal pipsqueak. So I might
Say that again?
Virginia equals pipsqueak.
Bergenia.
Virginia.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's it. That's the one. Bergenia. I can't remember if that's native. My brain tells me it's native. It might not be, but I've seen that plant be successful amongst things like Pachysandra. So if that plant can outcompete established Pachysandra, that tells me it probably would work with your Brunnera problem. My intuition tells me to tell you to do spring ephemerals, embrace the Brunnera. It's part of your landscape. Stop fighting it. Try to live with it and work your plants in with it. Think about trilliums and Virginia bluebells and Aquilegia and all the other spring ephemerals.
Okay, well, we are at the end of the hour already. And if you had a question that we didn't get to, or you think of something afterwards, I know that Kevin would be more than happy to follow up with you afterwards. So I think we're going to include your contact information in the thank you email, Kevin, the other reference materials that he had mentioned before. So thank you so much for your time. Before we go, I just want to remind folks of some upcoming events. We have Family Weekend, September 24th through the 26th. September 28th, we're starting our next lecture series. This is by Dr. Basu, professor of chemistry. I can understand why I struggled on some of the names. Basu isn't hard. I apologize for butchering that name. He's going to be talking about scientific progress and how we talk about it. And then, of course, Homecoming, October 22nd through the 24th. So for more events, to check out all the events that we have coming up, go to www.sualum.com. Again, thank you so much for being here, and enjoy the rest of your evenings. Bye-bye.
Thank you.